a challenge that I think women of my generation are facing, and I think men of my generation are facing as well, is the gender roles are very redefined in today's society. When I was a teenager, I was quite hard on myself for that. But now as an adult, I love that about myself because I feel like, the more older I'm growing, I'm like, yeah, that's how everyone else does it, but doesn't mean I want to do it that way. I want to do it my way. Super excited to dive into this conversation. So I'm Leena. I was born and brought up in Kolkata, India, and then I moved to Halifax in 2016 to start school in Nova Scotia. Now, I often get asked, why did I choose Nova Scotia from India? And honestly, the only answer is I saw on the SMU website that the university was close to an ocean. And I was just like, this sounds fun. Let's just do it. Right. And I'm so glad I did because I think just living abroad gives you a different perspective. You come out of a familiar environment and find yourself in a completely new way. Right. When I was in school, I was involved in a lot of different things. I ran some social ventures. After that, I worked at the banks and I've worked at real estate startups, I've worked in tech, and now I work for the government. So I think I'm at that phase in my life where I'm figuring out, okay, where do I fit in and what's next? Yeah.
So how would you define your time at SMU?
I think my time at SMU was all about self-discovery and figuring out who I am because, growing up in India, it was quite traditional, so there were certain boxes that I fit into and it was very comfortable. But coming to SMU, there were students from all across the world and everyone had such different values and culture. So it was so good to understand, okay, who am I around so many different people? What do I really enjoy doing? Right. I started making decisions independently, and I think that played a big role in really finding my true self and understanding what I enjoy, what I do not enjoy, what I align with. So definitely a time of figuring things out and finding myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in the introduction, you also mentioned about your basically plethora of work experiences, from government to tech to banking. Like, what would you say are the biggest lessons that you learned from those different types of jobs?
That's a very interesting question. I think something that I understood was no one knows how anything works, and everyone has an understanding of what's best for them, but it's not necessarily the best thing for everyone. Right. For example, when I worked in banking, people loved employees that stayed in the bank for like 10, 20 years and were very diligent about the tiny details. Right. And you think that's the best way to be a worker, an employee. And then I went and worked for a real estate startup, and it was very fast. No one cared about how well structured your emails were or how aligned your presentation was. It was just get the work out of the door and start something else, right? So the thing that was my strength at the bank, which was taking care of the details, was actually not my strength in real estate because it was very fast and everyone wanted me to work much faster. So that just made me realize that every environment, different things are seen as strength and different things are seen as weaknesses. And it's all about adapting to different environments and also staying true to who you are. And I think it just comes with experience that you get comfortable being yourself in different environments.
Right. On the topic of strengths and weaknesses, what would you say personally is your strength and your weakness?
I guess my strength personally would be that I love a good challenge. I love being uncomfortable. And, I like that a lot about myself, that I'm often pushing myself. And I think the flip side of that is sometimes when I'm comfortable and things are very stable, I'm like, okay, what's next? And, diving into the next thing, which can often mean that, I've not had an experience of working at a company for like 5 years at a stretch and know what that feels like. I've always been the person who's trying new things. That can be a weakness in terms of, I guess to a lot of people that might seem as a weakness.
So the next question that I will pose is still based on your introduction. So you're Indian. What do you think are some of the misconceptions about people from India or women from India?
I honestly, like, there's a lot of stereotypes, but I guess one of the misconceptions about Indians are that, you know, mostly Indians are in the medical field and you find them in tech and executive roles, but I think there's also a lot of creativity when you go and especially the city that I come from, Kolkata. So many amazing poets are from Kolkata. So there's a lot of creativity in our culture that often in the West is not seen. We're only seen for our scientific discoveries, more on like the hard skill side of things.
That is right,
yeah. Especially I think the Bengali culture in India, it's definitely very creative. For example, one of my favorite songs, a Bengali song, is Amake Amar Moto Thakte Dao. That means just let me be me. I do not want to give up my paint brushes and I do not want to stop writing my verses. I just want to be who I am. And I think that actually perfectly aligns with what you just said about that perception of people only being in dentistry or in law school and things like that.
So growing up, so you grew up mainly in India, right?
Yeah.
And then you ended up moving to Canada for university. So growing up, who would you say had the biggest impact on you? Would you say it's your mom or your dad?
Definitely mom.
Mom, right?
She's my best friend. She's also the person I argue the most with, but also the person that gets me the most. So it's a very special relationship, and definitely she's had the most influence on me.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you either learned from listening to her or you learned from watching her being a woman, especially an Indian woman?
You know, that's a very good question because I was thinking about that a few days ago. One of the things that my mom loved about me and also hated about me is at the same time is that I just don't listen to a lot of people. I just like to do what I think is the best to do. And she actually encourages that because, you know, she sees some part of herself in me in that way, but also, of course, as a mom, she's scared that, oh my God, like, you know, you have so much potential. I hope you live up to that. But usually she's used to seeing people make certain decisions in life to live out their full potential. So I think something that I learned from her is to actually follow your own intuition, because I just don't think in the society that she grew up in, she was given that space to do that. But whenever she actually acted out of her instinct instead of listening to other people, I saw her make the best decisions.
What do you think are some of the challenges facing women within your generation?
A challenge that I think women of my generation are facing, and I think men of my generation are facing as well, is the gender roles are very redefined in today's society, where before it was like, as a man, you went out, you provided and protected your family, and the women stayed behind and took care of the kids. That has dramatically and drastically changed, and I think now we are finding our place in a new society where it's there's a long way to go, but we've also come a long way. So there's a lot of, it's way more equitable than what it used to be maybe like 50, 60 years ago. So I think in today's generation, women, we are trying to figure out where do we fit in, and now we have a lot to take on, right? Like people have to be a mom, they have to be an entrepreneur, they have to balance a lot of juggle different balls, and I think it's just about finding that balance, which is, I find, a huge part of our journey as women today.
When you look at yourself, what would you say is the biggest struggle that you're facing right now? When you reflect on your life right now and your work-life balance, like what would you say is the biggest struggle that you're facing?
I feel like there's things that I'm learning. I don't necessarily feel like I'm struggling with anything at this point. Like
it could be a learning like, experience,
Yeah, I think that would be to again, that goes back to how to be myself in different environments. Because sometimes I find myself taking interest in things like industries that are very male dominated, and going in those industries, I'm a very feminine person. I love my yoga, my meditation, doing things from intuition, making things look good, caring about people's emotions. Not to say they're not masculine things, but traditionally they're seen as feminine things. So when I go into these environments like real estate or banking, and where it's all about just the numbers and how do we get more profitable, it's how do I continue to be my empathetic, creative self in those environments. And what I've noticed is when I can be confident enough to actually just be myself, people appreciate that. They find that new approach. They're like, oh, okay, I'm caring about my coworker. Oh, okay, I'm caring about my customers. And I can see people find like, although, sometimes I do feel like some people are like, oh, I don't care about all this mushy, like, all these nice and lovey-dovey stuff. But when you bring in empathy and caring for others, everyone's heart just melts and they just love it. So it's all about finding that confidence. I'm learning to be confident and be like, hey, you know what? I do care about people, and it matters to me how my words or my actions impact my colleagues or anyone else. So that's definitely been my biggest learning piece.
Within the Indian culture, obviously there's a lot of things that you took away from your time in India that now that you live here by yourself, I will assume you're implementing that into your daily life, either through being alone or at work, finding ways to take care of yourself and stay in tune with your culture and customs. Looking back on how you were raised, what are some pieces of advice that you would give your parents?
That's actually very deep, especially so because I don't think in Indian culture you give your parents advice. That's very what not to do as an Indian kid 101. So sorry mom, sorry dad if you're watching this. I think, I would say just take it easy. Like, in Indian culture, we have this thing where parents are almost like, if you believe in God, after God comes parents. Wow. So you do not question them. They can never be wrong. You do what they ask you to do. And I think what happens is that it's not necessarily the best thing for the kids. I think it's also not necessarily the best thing for the parents, because then when they make a mistake, however insignificant the mistake is, they're just so hard on themselves. And then they take it a little bit too personally when those mistakes are pointed out. And that comes from a place of they wanted to be the best parents that they could have ever been. So I think an easier way to do this is to take it easy. Just know that we're all imperfect human beings. We're all figuring life out. We all make mistakes, and it's okay. And, the older I'm growing, the more I'm realizing is that I feel like I was very hard on my parents when I was younger for, you didn't give me this, or you talked to me like that. And now I have a full-time job, and now I understand why my mom would yell at me if the chicken wasn't out of the fridge when she came out from work. I saw that meme on Instagram. I was just like, you know what? I get it. So I think definitely piece of advice for my parents would be take it easy. We're all humans. It's okay to make mistake, and no mistake for most part is the end of the world.
Now, relating to that question too, what would you say are some of the contributing factors to making you the woman that you are today?
I think my dad was very progressive. When we were raised, there was no difference. And my dad is actually quite older. I was a late child. So my dad is now in his 80s. Wow. So even then, I think my dad was very progressive. He loved women who were ambitious and who spoke their mind. I think that played a huge part in who I am today. I think the other piece of it was I was quite rebellious as a kid. And that's when I was a teenager, I was quite hard on myself for that. But now as an adult, I love that about myself, because I feel like, you know, the more older I'm growing, I'm like, yeah, that's how everyone else does it, but doesn't mean I want to do it that way. I want to do it my way. So I think that has played a big role in shaping me who I am today. And I guess the last piece would definitely be living in Canada, because I've always had a very multicultural friend circle. And that's opened my mind to how different people think differently. They have different upbringing, different life experiences that shapes who they are. So there are very few times that I find anything weird or odd, you know, until and unless it's, of course, like malicious in a way that it's hurting someone. My brain just doesn't work in a way like, oh, that's odd, just because that's not how I do it. So I think those were some of the contributing factors.
Like, if you were to compare your time in India to your time in Canada, what would you say are like the biggest differences between the two countries? And like, either it could be socially, in terms of education, in terms of like, you know, like culture as well.
Well, there are quite a few differences. I think Indian culture, it is more community focused. So, for example, when I go back home, my neighbors are so excited that I'm back home, and they just want to invite us for dinner, and they're like usually upset that, hey, why don't you come over more often? And you know, and whereas in North America, I don't know who my neighbor is even. Like, I've lived in the same apartment for like 2-3 years now. So I think that is a huge difference. But the flip side of it is, I think in India, people care a lot more about what your community is saying about you. Versus in Canada, it's not as rigid. I think people have that space to just be themselves. Then going back to India, I think when I was raised in India, there were a lot of like rules around like, okay, what is the best occupation to have, or, you know, what age you should get married. But then day to day, when you went to like went out and needed some help, people were actually not very rigid. Like, they're very open and they'll go out of their way to help you out. So if you went to a bank and, you know, you needed something to be done faster, I think you would find employees just being more open to that and being like, okay, you know what, let's see if I can talk to my manager and fasten this process up for you. Versus in Canada, where I find that, yeah, like, you can be what you want, you can have any other occupation, but I think people just follow rules a lot more in different ways. Like, now that I work at the government, there is like certain percentage you need to tip your taxi driver. No one goes and checks how much you actually tip them. So, and you know, it's like, I'm the kind of person, I'll be like, I'll tip you like 20%, because especially now that it's not coming out of my pocket, it's coming out of government's pocket, and we all pay taxes. That's my natural mindset. But I'll see my colleagues being like, oh, no, the rules is like 10%. It's like, you know, to me, it's like, this is distribution of wealth. This is going to someone who needs it. So, you know, I find it very interesting how there's like, they follow rules in India and in Canada, but different set of rules. And then I think the other piece of it is definitely expectations. I think in just like in any culture that's community focused, you have a lot of expectations. For example, even for our extended family, we do feel responsible if someone's not doing well. And it just naturally, that responsibility comes to us for our own family and our extended family, which I find is a little different in North America for sure. It's a little bit more about nuclear families as opposed to extended families. So when I'm like super excited about my cousin getting a nice job, or, you know, it's just, I just don't think it clicks with a lot of people who don't understand the culture back home.
Last question. You have 24 hours to live. What are you doing and why?
Well, that's easy. Drop everything, go spend time with family and friends. I I just think that's what matters most in life is relationships and love. So if I only had 24 hours to live, I would just spend it with people I love.
Yeah.